Hey there, welcome back to another review. This time it is a review of the 1987 classic, the spectacular science fiction epic RoboCop, the future of law enforcement. Now, RoboCop is a film that, if you ask me, is absolutely timeless. And I personally don't find a single thing wrong with it. I think everything works despite the fact that this is a film that could have easily been a absolute disaster considering all of the different elements that are at play here. This is a movie that is a prime example of controlled chaos. And if there was anything that was out of place or not in the right situation or the right casting, or if you didn't have the right director, things could have just unraveled at the seams because it's so chaotic. I mean, this film plays out unlike any other movie I can think of, other than maybe the sequel. Well, where it's just this very unique film where its plot is straight out of a B movie, and at times it kind of feels like that. But then there's this really smart subtext that's dispersed and hidden underneath, and then you have just randomness, like advertising parodies and satire of the news. And it's just one of those things where if you had knew nothing about this movie, you would think that you just accidentally flipped the channel one day and you came across some random movie, and now you're just watching some TV movie, because it has that sort of vibe to it, despite the fact that it is definitely a theatrical film. It doesn't have a TV movie look to it, but it has this TV feel because of all these different things that keep coming in and interrupting the story. But instead of being distracting, they actually add to the overall experience. And it's something that is unquestionably unique. And in some ways kind of breaks the fourth wall and does it in a way that isn't on the nose and completely obvious. The film was directed by Paul Verhoeven, and Paul Verhoeven is a master of manic energy and a master of manic direction and controlled chaos. So with a film like this that relies upon controlled chaos to make it work, and manic energy on top of that, he was the perfect director for this project. But he wasn't the first director who was attached to this project. In fact, there were multiple other directors who were attached to RoboCop before Paul Verhoeven was hired to direct the movie. In fact, Jonathan Kaplan was associated with the film for a good chunk of the pre-production and stuff like that, and the planning and development phase, because producer John Davison knew him and was a fan of his work, and something happened and Kaplan wasn't able to do it. I think Kaplan's a fine director, but I don't think he was right for this particular film. And after Kaplan wasn't able to do it, they looked for other directors. They even approached Alex Cox, who you might recognize as the director of Repo Man, and something happened and he wasn't able to do it. Then they approached Kenneth Johnson, who was the director of the V miniseries, as well as some episodes of the Incredible Hulk TV show with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. But he didn't like the film because he thought it was too violent, so he dropped out. And Paul Verhoeven came in, the king of hyperviolence, and it was just a match made in heaven. It was one of those things where fate intervened and found the perfect guy to direct the film. And I can't think of anyone else directing RoboCop as well as Paul did, let alone directing it, period. It's just one of those things where it's just so quintessentially Paul Verhoeven, that has so much of his DNA in there, that his direction and his involvement is a big reason why the film is as iconic and memorable as it is today. Verhoeven is a great director. He's a phenomenal director. One of my favorites, especially when it comes to action and dealing with controlled chaos. And he also does a wonderful job getting the most out of his actors, creating a really comfortable work environment, and really helming a ship in a way where it's just absolutely masterful. I can't sing enough praises about Paul Verhoeven's direction. He also does a good job working with effects and various other things. He's good at improvising. He's good at handling subtext or dealing with deeper themes, but not doing it in a way that doesn't come across as preachy or forced. Just an absolute gem of a director and one of my all-time favorite directors, to be honest. And I honestly miss Paul Verhoeven. I miss that manic energy. I miss that controlled chaos. I miss a lot of that in films. And I see a lot of movies nowadays where I could be like, where I'm thinking like, man, like this film could have used someone like Paul Verhoeven and would have just taken it to a whole nother level. So it's written by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner, and they were really big fans of the Judge Dredd comics. Initially, they tried to get the rights to Judge Dredd. I think they might have even written a spec script or something like that, but they couldn't get the rights, and so they decided to come up with something unique. One of them came up with the idea of a story called Super Cop, about a cop who gets killed or damaged and gets turned into a cyborg, and the whole drama involving that. And this film is kind of a offshoot of that, but there are other things that are added in there by one of the other writers that just make the film this unique combination of action and science fiction and satire and social commentary. Um, this is one of the finest and best scripts of the decade, if you ask me. It's that good. It's that well done. And funny enough, when Paul Verhoeven first got it, he threw it in the trash. And it was his wife that got it out of the trash and was like, "Hey, Paul, this is actually a really good script. Like, you should consider reconsider this movie." And thankfully for all of us, he did. So I got to give huge props to Paul Verhoeven's wife at the time because she recognized greatness when Paul didn't. But a lot of other people who saw the script, though, saw the potential immediately. Nancy Allen, when she read it, she thought this is going to be an amazing movie, and so did other actors that got their hands on the script. It's just a one of those scripts that comes along once in a lifetime, where everything just seems to click just so well, and it takes a concept of a robot cop, which easily could be done in a way that's corny, that's cheesy, that's laughable. I mean, look no further than a movie called Rotor. If you want to see how you can do something like RoboCop the worst possible way, or even RoboCop 3. But it's something that really, in theory, should not be as powerful as it is, but because of the script and because of the performances, it takes something that is a B movie plot and makes it so much more powerful and resonant and intense and just absolutely stellar in its storytelling and how it portrays characters and how it deals with society and all of these other things. The film also is one of the best movies, in my opinion, of showing the value of the human spirit and of humanity and what makes us human. And it creates this really interesting dichotomy and discussion about what makes us human. Is it our flesh and blood? Is it our memories? Or is it the soul? Like, because in this movie, Murphy is completely blown apart, and his body is essentially a corpse. It's no longer it's around inside this metal chassis, this cybernetic body, this shell, but it's not really alive. His brain, his brain is there, but there's all these other programming and all these other things that are impeding it. So it's Murphy's drive and his human spirit that makes him still human despite everything about him that's completely inhuman and robotic and just steel and wires. So it's just a great film to showcase that question about what makes us human. And it also is a great film that has a script that has subtext and social commentary that's slick, that's funny, that's biting, that's ballsy, and absolutely 100% ahead of its time. Because, if anything, RoboCop and its whole skewering of yuppie culture in the 80s predicted the future. The future where a lot of people around the world are just run and dominated by corporations. I mean, let's think about a recent example. Think about it, folks. Disney is essentially omni-consumer products. I mean, just think about how many IPs and studios they own, and how much control they have over things. They're essentially OCP, and there's a bunch of other studios and other companies that are essentially other offshoots of omni-consumer products. And back in 1987, this skewering of yuppie culture was something you could chuckle at and laugh at. And you can still do that with the film today. But when you watch the movie now, it's honestly quite terrifying. Because this isn't a joke anymore. This is reality. The yuppies have taken over. And they are dominating not only our culture and our society, they are controlling a lot of things in our world and in our infrastructure and in politics. And it's I mean, it's no laughing matter. I mean, we you could even argue that we have our own Dick Jones as the president of the United States. So it's one of those things where at the time it was like, ha ha ha, that's funny. A bunch of, corrupt, greedy yuppies. But now it's like, holy shit. this is this is so close to home. And that's a big reason why this script is so great, is because of that timeless quality, because of the fact that both Michael Miner and Edward Normire found a way to tap into the future of corporate domination, the future of corporate politics, and it was something that, in a lot of ways, other films had kind of talked about or maybe mentioned briefly, but not in the same size or with the same scope as RoboCop. RoboCop really gets lumped in with 80s action movies by a lot of people, and that's totally understandable because it has some really awesome action sequences in it. The shootout in the drug factory is one of the best shootouts, in my opinion, in action film history. It's so badass and it's epic, but it's much more than just an action movie. It's really great social commentary. It's also really great allegories and stories about humanity and even about other things. Like, a lot of people have talked about how RoboCop and the story of how Murphy becomes RoboCop is in a lot of ways an allegory or a comparison to stories in the Bible about Jesus Christ, about the crucifixion and everything. And you can kind of actually see that in the movie. So there's so much more layers to this movie than just a science fiction or even just an action movie. And a big part of that is definitely the screenplay. It's funny, it's clever, it's got so many just memorable lines of dialogue. that I could quote for days, but I don't really want to in this video because, a lot of people have done that already. Um, but I mean, stay out of trouble. Your move, creep. And even stuff like, just even lines like, guns, guns, guns. The Tigers are playing tonight, and I never miss a game. It's just the quotes. If you look at them devoid of any context, they might come across as a little bit not necessarily lame, but not anything that is that memorable. But what makes a lot of these quotes memorable is the way that these lines are said and the performances by the actors. How Peter Weller says lines like "Dead or alive, you're coming with me," or how Kurtwood Smith says things like "bitches leave." These are things that just really stick with you. And in a lot of ways, it's the performances that make these lines so memorable and so great. And it's also the script itself, but it's these actors that take these lines and just elevate them to a level that they would never be without these actors. And speaking of actors, I mean, just a phenomenal, just amazing cast. Peter Weller is as Alex Murphy, RoboCop, his quintessential role, the role of his career that made him a star. Because as much as I like and love Peter Weller, he's not a big star without RoboCop. He doesn't probably have that much of a career if he doesn't have RoboCop. Because Buckaroo Banzai I enjoy, but it was a box office bomb. Of unknown origin I really like. Did not do very well in the box office. Peter Weller was not really a bankable star before RoboCop, and afterwards he got more roles. And sadly he got typecast and didn't seem to get a whole lot of run as a big star, but he still has made a pretty nice career for himself despite that. I think he deserved better, but hey, things work out the way that they do for a reason, and that's what happened with Peter. But I know initially they didn't want him. They were looking at other actors. There was rumors about Schwarzenegger because, Orion did Terminator, so why not have Schwarzenegger play another cyborg character? Thankfully, that didn't happen. Uh, Apparently, Verhoeven really wanted Ironside or Michael Ironside or Rutger Hauer, and but they quickly realized that their body type wasn't really going to be the right kind of body type for the suit that Robotine and company were building, so they decided to go with a smaller, more lithe actor, and that's where Peter Weller came into play. And Paul saw how talented he was and saw the potential of Weller really nailing everything that this character needed to really bring it to life effectively. And in particular, he saw that Peter would be able to emote very well with the visor on and just with the bottom of half of his face. And Paul was dead on the money. Peter Weller, I always have said this, and I still feel this way. Peter Weller should have been nominated for an Oscar for his performance in this movie because this suit was incredibly uncomfortable. He was roasting his ass off. He was losing like 8 to 10 pounds water weight every day. He could barely even see. And on top of all of that, he's got just fiber. I don't necessarily think it's fiberglass, but it's like this foam rubber kind of material that's flexible but still incredibly heavy and uncomfortable. And despite all of that, he's able to block all that out and deliver a performance for the ages where you actually buy the emotions that he's portraying without him showing anything other than just a few different subtle movements with his body or with his face. It's just emoting with the lower half of his face and doing it in a way that's so effective that you can feel those emotions despite the fact that they're not as obvious on screen as other sequences that try to show grief or anger or confusion or any of these other emotions. And it's something that is just incredibly underrated. I mean, even when he takes his helmet off and, you know, he looks at his face in the mirror, Weller still has this glazed over, dead-eyed look on his face. Even though he's starting to regain some of his humanity, he still has that aspect of the cyborg where it's still there, but you can still, despite the fact that he's got these glassy, dead eyes, you can still see the human in that performance and in that character. And that's just mind-blowing to me. It's such a mind-blowing, phenomenal performance that in a lot of ways it gets credit, but I don't think it gets enough credit because it's not easy to do at all. I mean, let's take a look at Robert John Burke and how he was able to do it. Not very good. Joel Kinnaman, not even close. Absolutely laughable in comparison to Peter Weller. Richard Eden was the only one that came close, but at the same time wasn't even really in the same stratosphere. I can't think of any other actor off the top of my head that really could have pulled all of that off like Peter did. And every day and every time that I see this performance, it still blows me away every single time for that very reason. He did a good job too playing the everyman, the police officer, the hero, the hotshot cop, and Alex Murphy before he gets gunned down. Had enough personality and spunk to really get you to like that character, which makes his death scene all the more horrifying to watch, especially in the director's cut. I mean, he gets blown to hell and back. Arm gets blown off, limbs get blown off, knees shot at and shot out. He gets his head just shot, not necessarily clean off, but pretty much. I mean, gets a bullet right through his head. It's such a horrifying scene to witness because there's this helpless police officer who's surrounded by these ruthless criminals who are fucking with them initially, and then they just blow him away in the most graphic and intense way imaginable. And I don't care who you are, it's hard for you not to watch that scene and to wince and like feel like every bullet as it goes through Murphy's body. It's one of the most effective and powerful death scenes in cinema. And it's even more powerful and effective with the director's cut. So yeah, I mean, Peter Weller's performance in this is a tour de force. I mean, everything works. He's a believable action hero in the beginning. When he becomes RoboCop, he does a wonderful job playing the robotic character. He spent so much time and effort and energy into it too that I don't know if any other actor would go to that length. He went to a mime expert. Trained in football gear for months to get the movements down. Then, when he got the suit on, he realized it's too heavy and it's bulky and he can't do the type of movements that he was trained to. So he ends up improvising, and on the fly, after the production was halted for like 2 days, on the fly he comes up with a whole new routine of the slower, more deliberate robotic movements and just knocks him out of the park. I mean, if that doesn't scream Oscar, I don't know what does. I mean, he went through more shit and had to improvise more in a short amount of time than most actors do that get nominated for an Oscar, let alone win the Oscar for Best Actor. And speaking of acting, I mean, the cast, like I said, it's an amazing cast. Nancy Allen is Anne Lewis, one of her best roles and one of her best performances. A tough, no-nonsense female cop that is sexy, but at the same time, believably badass. And the film doesn't really try to shove it down your throat either or be like, hey, she's a strong, independent woman. No, she's just like any of the other cops. And I like that about the character. She could hold her own, and she had some weaknesses. She wasn't perfect, uh, but she was still a character that wasn't really any different than the other guys, the male police officers. They didn't really try to portray her as anything different. And I think that was honestly pretty revolutionary for the time, because a lot of the time they would always have some kind of thing that would separate the female cop from the other police officers, like, oh, she's weaker, or she can't really hold it, she needs to get help by the other police officers, or she's just eye candy. And that's really not the case with this character of Anne Lewis. There's a reason why this character is so beloved by so many of multiple genders, because this is a strong character, and Nancy Allen did a really great job portraying her. I don't think Stephanie Zimbalist would have done as good of a job. She was the original casting choice, but she had to drop out because of commitments to Remington Steele. But it's one of those things where, Nancy Allen was just right for the role, and we are all better off for her portraying the role as Anne Lewis. Ronny Cox is another actor who was just right for the role as Dick Jones. This is a guy who is known for being like the nicest guy that you will ever meet, like essentially Mr. Rogers in a lot of other movies and other media. And in this movie, he's the epitome of a dick. Like, he lives up to his name and then some. And Ronnie just pulled it off so well that he would end up getting more roles like this. And why not? Because he was so good at it. This is one example of someone who really didn't seem to have a whole lot of experience playing these kind of roles, but as soon as he got a role playing this villain, he relished the opportunity so much that he delivered a performance that was memorable and just intimidating and unforgettable. And it's from a guy who was known for being like the aw shucks neighbor that you would feel totally okay with having your kids stay over at his place, and nothing would happen, or you would trust him with pretty much anything, including your life. And here he is in this movie as like one of the biggest scumbag businessmen that have ever lived and have ever been on camera. Miguel Ferrer was also a lot of fun as Bob Morton. May he rest in peace. Another great casting choice. He did a great job playing the rising star, the rising executive, who was essentially another asshole, but despite that, his charisma was so good and so powerful that you just liked him, despite the fact that he's a douchebag. He's a douchebag who would step all over you to get to where he wants to be, but he's so likable despite all of that. And another prime example of that is Kurtwood Smith as Clarence Boddicker, one of my favorite villains in all of cinema, Clarence Boddicker. And a big reason why is because of Kurtwood Smith. Like, he's an amicable guy, and he's like another one of those guys who's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And he was known for playing these bookworm types, these nice guys, and he gets this opportunity to play this character who's a total sleazebag. And because of this amicable personality that he already has, you don't hate this guy, despite the fact that he's just an absolute piece of shit. But you still can't hate him, despite the fact that he's such a horrible person. I mean, even simple things like he gets arrested by RoboCop, taken to the police station, and RoboCop throws him against the counter, and Sergeant Reed, who was played by Robert DoQui, who also did a really nice job as the sergeant. It's a stereotypical role, the angry police chief, but he's so good at it. I love the scenes with him in the film. I think he's just great. I think he's hilarious too. I mean, a lot of the stuff is like, take Laughing Boy with you. But anyway, So RoboCop throws Boddicker up against the counter, and Sergeant Reed's like, "What's the charge?" "He's a cop killer." And then Kurtwood Smith just spits blood on the fucking arrest papers. And he's like, "Just give me my fucking phone call." You love this guy. You loved it. He's the epitome of a villain you love to hate, despite the fact that he's such a deplorable human being. The other guys in his gang are also in the same boat. Paul McCrane as Emil, Ray Wise as Leon Nash, Jesse D. Goins with his hyena laugh as Joe Cox. I mean, even Calvin Jung, who plays Steve Min, I mean, he doesn't have very many scenes, but he has a very memorable scene when RoboCop first breaks into the drug factory, and he says, "Come quietly, or there will be trouble." And then Steve Min, he just cocks his shotgun and he just says, "Ah, fuck you." I mean, even that guy was memorable and great. Uh, this movie just has such a great cast. Even the actors who played the news media break characters, Mario Machado as Casey Wong, and Lisa Gibbons as Jess Perkins, and even S.D. Nemeth as Bixby Snyder, the "I'd buy that for $1" guy, who is just, even though it's just a one note gag, like the guy's so he's just so into it that you can't help but smile every single time. Yeah, it's just a movie that, I mean, I said it was probably, I'm going to try to make it short, but hey, it's RoboCop. Like, it's one of those things where it takes however long it's going to take for me to talk about it, because that's what happens when you start talking about something that you're really passionate about. Like, it just, the love for it just starts pouring out from your brain and out of your mouth, and it's just hard to stop talking about it, because it's just a lot of fun. It's just a very enjoyable thing. So yeah, phenomenal, excellent cast, and a absolutely stellar score by Basil Poradores. One of my favorite scores, from the main theme, from the dramatic themes, from the themes that are trying to create more suspense or intrigue. Just absolutely stellar score. Another thing that should have been nominated for an Oscar. Just one of his best, and one of the best, most iconic main themes out there. Like, the RoboCop March is one of the best theme songs, in my opinion, for a character that's ever been composed. It's that memorable and that great. The cinematography by Joseph Acano was also really impressive. What I really love about this film is that it has so much manic energy in it, and a big reason why is because the camera is moving. It's constantly moving all over the place. The camera is alive. The camera, in a lot of ways, in so many sequences, is like its own character. It's not static. It's moving with the same energy as the film does and the screenplay does. And so does the editing by Frank J. Urasti. The visual effects, in some ways, some people might say are dated, but I think they work really well for the film. The stop motion effects by Phil Tippett and company, I think, are some of the best that have ever been put on screen. I still think they hold up quite well. The Roboteen's design for the RoboCop suit is just amazing. It's awesome. It's an awesome looking suit, from everything about it. It's just such an iconic and memorable and just legitimately badass looking suit. Like, it's so cool. I mean, you compare RoboCop's suit to even the endoskeleton in of the Terminator, and like, it's no contest, there's no question. Like, the RoboCop suit is a much more elegant, much more memorable, and genuinely unique suit. I mean, it looks like it has this weight to it, but it's not a very heavy suit despite that. And there's like all these different like pieces that were made out of foam and all these other things, and when it's on camera it looks like it's made out of steel, despite the fact that it isn't at all. There's no metal RoboCop suit. Like, it's all foam or other materials. just one of the best things that I personally feel Rob Bottin and his crew ever did. I mean, it's right up there with his work for The Thing, if you ask me, in terms of just prominence and just absolute epicness in size and scope. I mean, the RoboCop suit's a big reason why the film works too. Like, if the suit was lame or the design sucked, I mean, the movie wouldn't be as good because it would be a giant distraction. It's a lot like if Predator used the original like lizard duck design that Van Damme was in, but everything else was the same. Like the movie wouldn't be as good without Stan Winston's design for the Predator. The same thing happens here with Rob Bottin's design for the RoboCop suit. I also really appreciate the creativity and ingenuity by multiple different people involved with the cast and crew in terms of how they handled things, uh, the inventiveness of the screenplay and how it throws in its different gags and its different set pieces. Um, and I just love this movie. I think it's such a timeless classic film. It's one of those movies that I could watch over and over again and never get tired of it. Has a running time of like 102 minutes, but it never really feels like it's that long. And it just everything seems like it's just put together by a master craftsman on every level, whether it's the special effects, the visual effects, the score, the direction, the casting. Like everything about this movie is just absolutely phenomenal. And I know I keep saying that, but it's true. Like it's absolutely true when it comes to this movie. It's a terrific film that I cannot recommend enough. It's one of those movies that if you haven't seen RoboCop, you need to see it because it is absolutely well worth a watch and then some. And it's also another one of those movies where if you have seen it, like hell, like there's always room for RoboCop. Like people are like, oh, there's always room for Jello. Like there's always room for RoboCop. There's always room for this movie. Like it's one of those films that it's never gonna be a movie where I'm gonna be like, oh man, I don't know if I want to watch that movie again. No, I'd be like, fuck it, let's go. Like, and a big reason why is just how well crafted and how well done it is on every level. It's one of those movies that captured lightning in a bottle, and I am forever thankful for that. And I'm definitely not alone. I don't really know what else to say about RoboCop. I've already expanded and discussed a lot of things about it. Pretty much said everything I wanted to say. I know that there are some flaws that some people might point out, like the stuff with Dick Jones when he falls out of the skyscraper at the end. But when I watched it again, I barely even noticed that. I think that's something if you like freeze frame it or slow mo the scene, it's more noticeable. But that's not even enough for me to even knock this film down at all on any capacity because everything else works so well. I'm not going to be like, oh, this movie's like not a 5-star film to me just because there's one scene that's a little dodgy in terms of the effects. Like, no, like everything else is just great. I mean, there's probably stuff that I left out or didn't mention. I mean, I'm thinking about at the top of my head, like the fucking just brutal boardroom scene where Kenny just gets absolutely turned into a meat bag that's just by the Ed 209. But there are so many scenes in this movie that I could probably talk about for days, and that's not the point of this video. So yeah, I don't know what else to say except if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give the movie 5 out of 5, 2 thumbs up, nothing less than that. And yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really love RoboCop. I love this movie, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, I will see you later. See ya.